Welcome to the Chamber Leadership Alliance and today's Chamber Leadership Development Program training.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Akriti Rana, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the program manager for the Chamber Leadership Alliance, and today I would like to welcome you all to the Chamber Leadership Development Program on Strategic Planning and Business Plan Development. Today's topic is critical connections to strategy and planning. I would like to welcome our incredible partners at Wells Fargo for their support of this program. And before I welcome our expert for the program today, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and all the CLDP presentation will be uploaded on the CLA website after the webinar series on strategic planning and business plan development ends on October 6th. We encourage you all to share the recordings and presentation with your fellow chamber leadership. Please be sure to use the chat and Q&A function on Zoom for any questions. These questions will be answered during the program. Also, I'd like to thank you all for those of you who filled out the pre-training survey for today's program. Please be sure to fill out the post-training survey as well, which you will all receive in your email. Lastly, I would like to welcome you all to the CLA Coffee Connection, which is an optional 30-minute networking event at the conclusion of the third training of this pod, which is on October 6th. This networking event is designed for you to meet other chamber leaders and discuss what you have learned during the training. Link for registration will be shared in the chat box shortly. Now I'd like to welcome the expert of the day, Dr. Sarah Skidmore. Dr. Sarah Skidmore is a leadership development consultant and innovation practitioner. Dr. Sarah's passion for future of leadership, work, and learning drive the perspective she brings to leaders. Her inclusive leadership and strength-based approach impact her executive coaching and leadership consulting. Prior to being a leadership development consultant, Dr. Sarah Skidmore led marketing strategy for a variety of sectors, including small businesses, nonprofit, and global manufacturing. Dr. Skidmore, welcome.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen here. Okay, here we go. So if you were with us with the first session last week, you got to already see a picture of my dog, and I shared this because it is always
Skidmore?
important.
Sorry
Yes.
to interrupt you. Would you mind turning on the auto captioning feature?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, I knew I would forget that one. Thank you so much for reminding me.
My pleasure.
So here is my dog, and I hope that brings a smile to your day. Maybe on our next session, I'll bring a different picture there. But I'm so excited you all have joined us again. In our first session last week, we unpacked strategy and planning. We spent time looking at strategy and its connection to leadership. We spent time looking at influences that impact our strategy and also critical steps in strategy creation. And so in today's session, which happens to be on today, September 22nd, which is a milestone birthday for myself, but I don't discuss age in professional settings, but it is my birthday. So I'm excited to basically have a really big birthday party with all of you during this session. And so today we will be spending time looking at critical thinking. We will be looking at innovation, futures, and inclusion, and integrating some of those really important questions that you all submitted during our last session. And then, of course, we have our third session on October 6th, where we will dive into a lot of tools, a lot of methods where you can come out with items that you can specifically use with your chamber. So again, during our time together, the same principles are true as of last time. Please enter your questions into the chat as they arise, and I will do my best to answer them in this setting. No need to wait till the end. Of course, you can do that as well, but feel free to let us know those questions. And then, like our last session, we're going to be going through a lot of content. We have 90 minutes together here. And so the goal is not for you to memorize or comprehend everything that we talk about, but find a couple of those nuggets that would be useful to where your chamber is at and the challenges that you're facing. And then we continue to work from theory to practice. So our last session was a lot of theory. This session is a mix of theory and practice. And then our next session will be solely devoted on practice. So to recap from last week, if you didn't join us last week, or just as a refresher, we spent time talking about how leadership and our view and our understanding of leadership shapes how we approach strategy. We spent time looking at influences that impact our strategy. And we also looked at the simple 3-step process for creating strategy. So as a recap again, we see the evolution of leadership from the early 1900s to be really about power and control. And over the past century, we've seen leadership evolve into different styles and adaptive leadership and strengths-based leadership and different approaches that a leader can take to foster growth and buy-in within the context that they are in. And that definitely shapes the strategy that we bring. Important influences, again, is the structure. What's the organizational structure of your particular chamber? We talked about how there are different ways that chambers are organized and how that impacts how a chamber might go about conducting strategy work. We highlighted the importance of having a shared vision and buy-in to those critical values of what your chamber is trying to accomplish. We highlighted the fact that having the people that need to be involved in the strategy development is essential. So knowing, okay, in our chamber setting, who needs to help make these strategies? Also, that anticipated impact of what is the goal of the strategy we're trying to create? What are we trying to accomplish? What is that impact that we anticipate? And then finally, the importance of having that culture of collaboration with everyone involved in the strategy process. Again, the final step we talked about from last week was the 3 important steps of strategy creation. First, starting with development, implementation, and then optimization. And I'm really excited for today's session because we're going to dive into this a bit deeper. All right, so if you recall, we started out our session last week with the temperature check, right? We're in the pandemic, so sort of playing off of that aspect there. And I offered a QR code that had a survey in there. And I appreciate everyone that responded because we've got some really cool insights from this group of people about what some of the important things are to you right now. So one of the questions that I asked in that survey was, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to strategy and planning for your specific chamber? And take a look at this. So this is a pie chart with some of the key areas that you all on this call shared were some of the biggest challenges. So the biggest challenge related to what is the focus? What are the priorities? How do we go about accomplishing, coming up with what should the focus be? What should the priorities be? The second big area you can see in green over here is about participation and engagement. 39% touch on the importance of participation and engagement, but how do we overcome that? That's a big challenge for our chamber. Then we have implementation, of course. And then some other areas of challenge included representation, funding, and budgeting as well. So just wanted to share that. So think about your chamber, right? As we did with session 1, session 2, we're going to have reflection in here as well, and where you may fit, your chamber may fit within this, and know that you are not alone, right? We are all sort of battling this idea of what's the focus, what should the priorities be, how do we foster participation and engagement. So you are not alone with the challenges that you are facing as a local chamber. A second question from that survey we did was, when it comes to strategy and planning, I am interested in learning more about. Okay, this is the really cool part for me as well, because this is where I can, nerd out a little bit, and sort of offer, as we talked about, moving to practice, from theory to practice, making sure that we're integrating some of those practices that will really align with what our group is interested in learning about too. So definitely great to see we're interested in best practices, which we're going to touch on several of those today. Also interested in how do we go about interacting with our members, whether that's identifying member needs, whether that is cultivating member buy-in. How do we do that? What are some of the best ways to do that? Then we see tied for third, if you will, is executing and implementation, as well as identifying and engaging external partners. And so that's a cool one for me. I also like to nerd out a bit on that one. And we're actually going to be talking about that one in particular in our session number 3. And I'm going to give you a really cool tool for how you can go about doing that. And then also funding is an area of importance as well. So this is just to sort of give you a little bit of feedback and, let you know that as you filled out the survey, right, you shared your concerns or what you're interested in, but just understanding that others on the call have very similar questions and concerns. So you are not alone as a chamber leader. So today, we're gonna split today's session into sort of 4 parts, if you will. I'm a very visual person, so we have this puzzle graphic. So we'll be tracking our progress with the puzzle graphic throughout the session, and we'll be spending time on looking at strategic thinking. What's that about? We'll be spending time seeing the connection between inclusion and strategy, seeing the connection between futures and strategy, and also seeing the connection between innovation and strategy. So as we think about strategic thinking, this was a visual I shared in our first session, where when we think about leaders in any organization, whether a business, a nonprofit, a chamber, you name it, there's important roles for a leader to play within their setting. And one of these roles is a strategic thinker, right? That means that as a leader, you are showing up to your context, able to think strategically, while also able to encourage your team to think strategically. And so, why is this important? Strategy is not just a one-time a year tactic kind of a thing about, okay, let's invest in creating our strategy, right? And then we can move on until we come back to it 2 or 3 years later, right? We explored last week how it's an ongoing process. And there is much involved in it. So strategic thinking involves planning, discerning, or giving attention to decisions. It's one of those forms of thinking that, again, it's not just something we pull out and use every once in a while. It's something that we want to make sure is always paramount in how we are approaching our chamber and in the work of our chamber. So critical components to strategic thinking, right? Like strategic thinking can seem very complex, maybe it's out there. It's like, what is it exactly? I know I'm supposed to think strategically. I know I'm supposed to have others in my chamber think strategically, but how do we do that? Or how do we show growth? Maybe it's an area that you are interested in pursuing further, but you're not quite sure what that looks like. And so 3 critical components to strategic thinking, which really sort of help lay the groundwork, are understanding that it's collective. So strategic thinking is not just simply one person in the organization or one person in the chamber creating the strategy. It really involves gathering the minds of those that need to be involved in that process, and collectively working together in those inclusive settings where we're honoring and giving voice to a variety of individuals. It's very collective work. Strategic thinking is present yet future oriented. So that means that we know we're making strategies that we will use today, and we will, how can we use this strategy today, right? And making sure that the strategies within our organization are strategies that can be possible, that we actually are capable of implementing, right? We don't want to spend time creating a strategy that we don't have the people, right, to help implement the strategy. So it's very present, but it's yet future oriented, going back to that anticipated impact of where is it that we want our chamber to be? Where is it that we want our chamber to go in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And then creating a strategy in the present that will help us walk there. And then, of course, strategic thinking is artful yet analytical. So it's that balance of understanding that we do want to make sure that we are analytically using metrics and data as appropriate, but that we aren't so data driven that there's not room for creativity or iteration and things of that nature. So really think about those 3 components. If strategic thinking is something that you're interested in exploring, but I'm not quite sure what that looks like, these are 3 components that may help you have a better understanding of when we say the word strategic thinking, what is it exactly that we're talking about. So I'm an analogy person, and this idea of equating the chamber to a living system, to a garden, right, is something that really speaks to me, because I can conceptually understand growth in that way, right? Just as we spend time in gardens to nurture and grow and preserve the garden, right? The individual flowers that may exist, or the fruits or vegetables, depending on what's in your garden. So too are our chamber leaders, are you all on this call, with really helping to grow the garden. And strategy, right, is one of those ways that as leaders in our context, we can help our context flourish, our context grow. So really use that analogy. That's always been one that's stuck with me and helped me really understand how are all these things connected? How are our leaders and our strategy and our chambers and our teams, how is that all connected? Imagine your chamber to be a garden, and that you are one of the gardeners as the chamber leader, in helping cultivate a garden, helping cultivate a chamber, right, that is growing and flourishing. In our strategies and our business plans that we're focusing on in this session is one of those ways that you can cultivate growth. Okay, so chambers who create inclusive and collective strategy may. So some of the questions that we received in the last session was about, who all should be involved, and we'll dive on in that in a couple slides further. But think about crafting that inclusive and collective space that may include, and this is not a definitive checklist of you have to make sure you hit one of these bullets, but this is rather to give you ideas. So if you are not quite sure who should be involved or whatnot, think about collaborating with external partners, engaging your members, partnering with relevant experts, and even involving representative leaders. So think about those as potential ways that you can help build that collective and inclusive space where you're including stakeholders that may be active in your chamber. They may be active in your local community or your region, and you would like their perspective involved in it. Think about who all you are able to include in your planning and development work. So here we go. We're going to go through a couple of questions today, and I'll give a couple tools here. So again, when we're thinking about that inclusive, who do we include type of question. So one of our questions for one of our colleagues in the Greater Cleveland Partnership was, what role do our members and constituents play in strategy development? That's a good question. Likely several of you also on the call have this question, and it's a contextual question, meaning that depending on the specific chamber we're working with, we'll likely get a different answer, and that's okay. And it's not something where we are prescribing you have to do ABC, but rather let's reflect on what's appropriate for your chamber and your culture. So when we go about answering this question, I wanted to include a couple of bullets here. And again, if you're a screenshot kind of a person, go ahead and screenshot this. But as we mentioned, the slides will be available after the sessions. But if you would like to capture this information today, go ahead and feel free to screenshot this. So what role, who should be involved? What does that look like? Well, I'm gonna ask back a question of what role, right, does the board's chamber, or depending on the size of your chamber, the chamber's board, or depending on the size of your chamber, the chamber's staff, what role does the chamber's leadership team desire for the members and constituents to play? And that's important, right? Because knowing what the goal of the chamber's leadership is when it comes to involvement and who is included in that process is going to give us answers to who should be included. And so there has to be consensus around that, right? So we have to have a starting point of our chamber leadership team, whether again it's the board or staff or who it may be, has to have consensus around who they think is appropriate to be involved in the strategy at hand. That really goes back to culture. That really goes back to how decisions are made in a particular chamber. So when we look at what role should members and constituents play, for instance, we may have a chamber that says, we want every member's opinion to be heard. Or you may have a chamber that says, we just want to offer a perspective for our members to lean towards. You may have chambers that want to, pick a couple of members to be on a task team or a subcommittee. There is a variety of different ways. And so I hope that helps give shape to that question as to what role, who should be involved. Go back to the leadership team, right, for any chamber, and have consensus around. So spend time talking as a leadership team of, okay, who do we want involved in this strategy development process? And then from there, we can figure out what's appropriate. So I hope that gives some context there. So one of the other things is, how do we go about including other people in the development process? So you'll see here again on the chart our simple 3-step process from session 1, where we talked about develop, implement, and optimize. So there was a lot of questions about, well, how do we engage members in developing strategy? So if your chamber has decided, yes, we want to engage our members in that process, I've got some very concrete examples right here. And again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, we may nuance or recommend certain tactics versus others. Think about, how can you use online surveys, especially in the time of the pandemic? This is certainly a tool that can be used whenever, not just because of the pandemic, but it may be something you want to more heavily rely on. With online surveys, we're talking about, something you can create with SurveyMonkey or another platform to deliver a survey. And in there, you have a variety of different things that you can ask your members, right? If you want to have open-ended questions where you just get feedback from the members, and then you go in and codify results and categorize the feedback. Or you can, ask anything from a preset list of options if you're trying to get buy-in on one specific area. Also consider virtual focus groups. So that may be something that is new for your chamber. It may be something that you've participated in with a different business or a different entity that you haven't applied in your chamber context before. So think about that. Identifying 6 to 10 of your chamber members, having a preset list of discussion points or questions, and then coming together, whether it's through GoToMeeting or Zoom or whatever it may be, and facilitating that focus group online. That can be something that, again, you as a chamber leader can facilitate, or you might be able to reach out to one of your chamber members, right, who is skilled in online facilitation or skilled in delivering these types of focus groups and leveraging your relationships and connections that way. Another way to engage members in the strategy development process is simply asking for experiences, stories, testimonials. So if you are trying to determine what your members love most about your chamber, right, and then how you can maximize that in the virtual space or in the future or whatnot, you may say to your members, hey, tell us your favorite experience or the most impactful story you have working with our chamber. What is something that you love the most over the past year of working with our chamber? Or if when you first started and joined the chamber, why did you join? Getting that type of feedback from your members is a way that you can gather information to help inform the strategies you're developing. We have feedback and review options. Also, giving members seats at the table. So moving from just gathering their perspective or their feedback, but having them sit at the table, whether it's a virtual table during this time or whatnot, but having them present when decisions are being made and having them have voice and influence. And then another one there that you never can go wrong with is social media polls, right? So if your chamber has a Facebook account, a LinkedIn account, putting out surveys and just getting a feel for how individuals respond. You have an opportunity there to just not limit it just to chamber members, but maybe you could expand it to your region or your area or whatnot and get greater feedback. So those are some very tactical and practical ways that you can engage members in the strategy development process. Okay, so another question that we had was what types of tactics to use when brainstorming and building consensus. So what are ways that we can go about building that consensus? So again, I'm going to ask a question in response, right? So what tactics can we use? Well, the first question is, What are you trying to accomplish? What's the time frame you're working with? Who all is involved? Is it where we have, 5 to 10 individuals involved, or is it where we have maybe 700, 800 people involved? What does that look like? And what is that overall purpose? So the different brainstorming tactics, right? We'll go through a couple today, actually, and then in session 3 we'll dive through several more. But before we look at a specific tactic, we really need to understand, okay, what are we trying to do with the brainstorming? What's the goal coming out of the brainstorming session? And that will actually guide which tools and how we structure brainstorming and how we would go about facilitating a brainstorming session. But this question about the word consensus really made me think about the importance of organizational justice and the need for organizational justice when we're building these collective and inclusive environments. And so I want to share with you a couple principles critical to organizational justice, and think about, in your context, do these exist, right? We're going to talk about 3 different principles. And again, as we talked about in session 1, if you reflect on your chamber and you don't see these areas of justice currently existing, that's an opportunity to work towards including them, right? It's not to say, yes, we have all 3 because that's what, we're supposed to say, kind of a thing. It's, let's really reflect and do these exist within our chamber? And if they don't, okay, we know that, and let's work to have them exist, right? Let's put in the work. Let's do it. So, organizational justice. So there's 3 components of organizational justice. So we have procedural, interactional, and distributive. So you'll see the 3 boxes across the screen. We have the blue, the orange, and the pink. And these each touch on a different aspect of justice. So when you're going through here, you may say, oh, our chamber for sure has 1 or 2 of them, and you may be lacking in another one. It's an opportunity to improve, okay? So when we think about procedural justice, what does that look like? Well, that means that we're looking at our policies, the methods we use, the procedures our chambers have that are used to achieve an outcome. So really looking at the process. Do we have justice within our process? So a lot of that has to do with transparency. Do we have policies written down, or do we have our procedures written down? And can our members access that, or can our board members access that? Is it transparent? The orange aspect here, we have the interactional justice. That is about interactions, right? The relationships among those involved in the outcome. So the relationships of our board members, of our members, of maybe our external partners, right? Are our interactions, are we upholding justice principles in our interactions? And then the third area of justice to think about is distributive, which has to do with the outcomes themselves. Is the outcome itself based on justice? Is sort of justice present in there? So when we think about consensus and how do we build consensus, how do we build buy-in, how do we build engagement with our members, or even just other stakeholders? But I know a lot of questions were focused at member buy-in. Really think about the organizational justice in your chamber. Are there ways that maybe your chamber hasn't currently shared some of the policies or processes or ways that, whether it's the board or staff members or task teams, go about making decisions, or how they came to decisions? Sharing that information, being transparent, obviously not sharing anything that is confidential or proprietary, or harmful in any way. In our interactions, how are we having just interactions, right? What do we have? Standards of professionalism? Do we have standards of inclusion and justice that exist within our chamber meetings, within our chamber interactions, things of that nature? And then the outcomes themselves is, what is our chamber actually doing? And is there perception of justice there? So when you're thinking about consensus, right, those are some of the key areas that you're like, okay, we want to build more consensus. Just sort of think about these areas, and these are good ways to help strengthen consensus and buy-in building. So I've got a quote here. By exploring futures, an organization empowers itself to prepare and also shape their preferred future. A people leader recognizes that an organization plays a role in building the future, whether they intend to or not. So what does that mean? That means that simply by us participating in our chambers and by being present in our chambers, whether we have the forethought of realizing we're impacting the chamber and where the chamber is going, or if we're unaware of it, we are impacting it, right? We are, whatever environments and contexts we are in, we do have influence. And so when we think about strategies and planning and futures, we understand that we have influence, right? And the strategies we create are the ways that we can direct our chamber towards what our anticipated impact is, what our preferred future is. So here we go. We've got another question connected to this. I think the main problem would be development of an actual strategic plan and knowing the difference between that and a calendar of events. So this is really connected to futures and futures thinking. So when we think about building a strategy, there are several different components involved, and a calendar of events can be part of a strategy, right? So how do we make a distinction between the different areas? This is a great question. I love this question. So let's dig into it. So when we think about futures, right, that influences our visioning. So that idea of, oh, wow, what do we want the long-term future to be? And then how do we want our chamber to exist in that future, right? That's part of the visioning. Then from visioning, we use that visioning to shape the strategy. So there's a particular future out there, and we see our chamber being a part of it in XYZ way. So how do we build the strategy so that our chamber is fulfilling that vision in the future? And often a calendar of events is one of the deliverables, one of the tactics that's included in that strategy. So let's think about it a different way. So here's a different type of visual for all our visual learners. So when we are thinking about futures, so we're thinking 10, 15, 20 years out in our community, in our city, in our nation, whatever it may be, what are some of those futures, right? And there's resources online. This is not something for you as an individual that you now have to figure out how to do this, right? It's likely that there are organizations in your community, in your region, that are doing this type of work that you can access and pull from, and that are known, and things of that nature. So hear me, I'm not recommending everyone become a futurist, but just being aware that resources exist that you and your chamber leaders can look at to understand. So we have this vision for the future. We're like, yes, we want to be a part of XYZ future. So from there, right, that's where we come up with our vision for our chamber. Our chamber, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're working on a strategy that we will be XYZ. We will offer our community XYZ. We will be the voice for XYZ. From there, we say, okay, how do we do that, right? You have your vision in mind, right? You always want to start with the vision of where you're going. So how do we do that? That's the strategy, right? That's where we're like, okay, let's build this out. This might be a multi-year kind of thing. And again, as we mentioned in our last session, we definitely want strategies to be iterative. We don't want to create it and then let it sit in a file on a folder in our desktop for years. We want it to be something we come back to, maybe every quarter. And then once we have that strategy, right, the near term, which is where we'll see that calendar of events as a likely tactic, is how do we go about implementing that strategy? So I hope this visual sort of offers a little bit of context. It's often really easy. The easy way and the simple way is to just want to focus on that calendar of events or focus on that near term. And especially now, we just want to focus, okay, the next 2 months, we just got to get through the next 3 months. We just got to get through the next 4 months, whatever it may be. But I really challenge our chambers to take that strategic approach to coming up with their plans and think about what is it that we want our chamber to be known for, and then how can we go about implementing that. And then the calendar of events has a role in that, but it's not the point that you want to focus on, right? You want to focus on the vision, creating the strategy, and then events may be a way to facilitate that strategy. Okay, so we've got another quote here. A people leader, a chamber leader, knows that the future is not randomly occurring, as we just worked through, and that as a leader, you have the opportunity to influence your organization, to understand this future-focused idea, to prepare those strategies to thrive in that future, and then to implement those strategies to shape the future. So think about this, when we talk about innovation, a lot of times you'll hear individuals say something about, oh, we're so innovative, or, you know, we got to come up with some innovative way to do this or that. What is innovation? Is innovation sort of just the buzzword that everyone wants to be known for being innovative? Like what's going on with that? And so here's a good definition of innovation that I found. And this is a great resource if you are a book reader like myself. The Innovator's Mindset, it's a great resource. I recommend it. So innovation can come from either invention, which is something totally new, right? That's often what we think of, something totally new. But innovation can also be an iteration, a change for something that already exists. But if the idea isn't new and better, it's not innovative, right? So that's a good way to think about it. Is it can be something completely new, or it can just be a way of improving that next iteration, that next step of making something that currently existed, has a long time existed, and make it better. So new and better. So that's something to keep in mind again with, if you're like, you know, everyone says the word innovation, but what does it actually mean? Think of new and better. So if we were in person, which we are not, but if we were, not only today would I bring cupcakes for the birthday party, but we would likely have some soda cans and some materials to make sandwiches, right? Because this is an interactive way to sort of highlight the idea of innovation. So often we want innovation to be as simple as opening a can of soda, right? It's quick, it's seamless, it's relatively easy. just about anyone can do it. Or we want innovation to be, again, as simple as taking a bite out of a sandwich. And these analogies are thanks to the resource, the Myths of Innovation, which is another book I would highly recommend if you're really into exploring innovation more, right? Like, we often want that innovative idea to be something that's just like, you know, simple, easy, but yet it's not, right? Because we also give so much value to, oh, this new great idea, and it's often not just as simple as opening a can of soda or taking a bite out of a sandwich. So let's use another chamber question we have here to explore this idea a little further. So we have a question here. Retooling, so we're looking to retool our strategy for the low touch economy, knowing the world is Zoom and virtual fatigued, you know. So the first point would be retooling your strategy means you already have a strategy, which is great, right? So this is where we're thinking about that iterative approach to strategy. So that is great. And again, depending on, you know, the structure of your chamber, I highly recommend reassessing your strategy at least every quarter. It doesn't have to be a super long or in-depth process, though it can be if you would like it that way. But it's just a matter of, hey, let's check in with our strategy, make sure, you know, we're still moving towards it, make sure it's still relevant, right? So during the pandemic, many of our chambers may have found that either, to this question, they would like to retool their strategy, or some of our chambers may have found that their current strategy isn't relevant anymore for this time. Or they may have found, hey, we're still trying to do our strategy, but we're not seeing success. So that goes back to that iteration of let's pause and reflect. And so when we have situations like a global pandemic, right, that obviously is a big experience. That's like a highlighting point of, yes, we have to reassess our strategy. But get in the process of doing this even when we have moved past the pandemic. And again, depending on your chamber, definitely recommend quarterly. You could, depending on how active your chamber is, you could do it once or twice a year if you have a smaller chamber. But if you have a very active chamber, just having that check-in of like, okay, are we still moving in the right direction? Great. Do we need to sort of refocus? Okay, great. How can we go about that? So if you are in the spot where you're trying to retool your strategy, let's talk about the change versus benefit analysis. So we're going to go over this tool, and it is something that you can apply if you're trying to retool your strategy. But it's also a tool to keep in mind that you can use in the future for a variety of different ways, right? So the change versus benefit analysis, I have the chart here. You can see it in the blue box. So it's a matrix, and we have the 4 different quadrants there. And so it's a futures-minded technique, right? So that's wordy for, it's a tool. It's a tool for our leaders to use. Again, it can be, maybe you have a task team from your chamber. Maybe you work through this with your board. This tool is something that can be done in many different settings. So the value of a tool like this is the ideation, right? And so that's why we go back to one of the first points we had today, which is talking about strategic thinking is collective, and strategy and business planning is inclusive. So we want to have a variety of different perspectives that participate in this activity, because the more perspectives we can bring together, the more ideas and the potential to unlock something that is new and better, something that is innovative. Now, at your chamber, you could work through this exercise individually. You could ask your board members, you could ask your members themselves to work through it as well, individually. Or you could offer times where you have a virtual gathering, where teams come together and sort of ideate, bounce ideas off of each other. Again, this can be something where maybe it's you have your board, 8 to 10 people on a Zoom call, and you're bouncing ideas together in these different quadrants, where you screen share. This could be an opportunity for some focus groups with your members. It could be an opportunity that you identify maybe a couple of other local or regional organizations that you want to have come together and brainstorm and ideate together, right? So maybe they're outside your chamber, they're aware of the area, they're aware of the context, and can offer some new perspective there. Okay, so with this tool, with the change versus benefit analysis, it allows you to explore different impacts that stem from a decision or change. And then the insights gathered from this help you make decisions. So this, working through this exercise itself isn't going to tell you what to do or create the strategy for you. What it's going to do is inform the strategy and the decisions that you make, which is really what we want. When we're working on strategies and plans, again, the idea isn't just to create a plan as quickly as possible in a Word document. The plan is to really get that collective, that inclusive environment where we have different perspectives and we're able to then work together to craft that strategy, that we have buy-in, that builds long-term engagement as we implement it. So let's work through this here. So if you are working with the chamber, right, that is needing to retool their strategy, okay, so that's the context, it's the frame of what we'll talk about. And in the middle, we're gonna, from our previous question, we'll put in there, so the change to consider, right? Now we are in a low touch economy. So when you use this tool, think about one change at a time that you want to do. Okay, cool. I've got a question here, so just want to share it. Could you use the change versus benefit analysis at the beginning of your chamber's operating year? That is a great question. Yes. So this could be, sorry, how to get the screen off there. This could be something that you go about and you use every year. It could be something that you, anytime you're coming up with a new strategy, whether it's for the year ahead, whether it's for a new project you're trying to do, maybe it's a new partnership your chamber is doing with another group or anything like that. Yes, you can use this. And this is scalable. So what I mean by that is often when I'm working with teams in different organizations, I'll work with some leaders and say, hey, I'm a small nonprofit, or I'm a small business. All right. You may feel like you're a small chamber. This is scalable, right? On the other end, you may be a multi-million-dollar organization, multi-million-dollar chamber, and this is appropriate as well. So it can be used in any context. The way that I would go about facilitating it would be different, but the principle is there. So it's something that we want to fill out. So here you'll see, okay, what does this look like? How do we go about it? So in your settings, right, you'll go through and ideate. Okay, so in a low touch economy, right, if we don't retool our strategy, right, if we maintain the current, which would be your current strategy, AKA, let's say before the pandemic, right, there is potential. And so this is just me, what I'm doing with this is just offering ideas. I'm not suggesting this to be true, but I'm just trying to show you how you would use this tool. So if you don't change your strategy from before the pandemic, you may have lost relationships. Your chamber may have lost relationships. Your chamber may have lost revenue. If you're no longer having in-person meetings and that's how you gathered revenue, you may lose market share because there may be other organizations that network people together that your members move to, if your chamber isn't doing anything. Or you may have lost brand awareness of, the chamber hasn't done anything in 7 months. Will people still be as aware of it? Okay, these are just ideas. So this is how you would do this process. You'd have your group of people together, and you come, okay, so what are some of the negative impacts if we don't make the change? And you'd write them down. So back to what we talked about from last week about having that time in reflection, this is another thing. Force yourself to write down the ideas, right? We want to capture the information. So then next, okay, if we adopt the change, if we change our strategy due to the low touch economy now, what might negative impacts be? Well, as stated in the question, you may have a lack of participation due to virtual fatigue, due to Zoom fatigue. That may happen. But what positives could happen? What is something that could positively happen? So if your chamber does change your strategy due to the low touch economy, well, maybe you will not only maintain the awareness people have of your chamber, but maybe you could potentially even grow it, right? If you do it well and you're present, whether it's having your chamber be present on LinkedIn or virtual meetups or, whatever it may be, right? You may grow in awareness. Also, you may fulfill a market need, which could be positive, and you could offer virtual resourcing for your members. That again could be positive. So we have another question come in here, and it says, we are losing members due to non-face-to-face and also is affecting our recruiting. Any suggestions on different strategies? Okay, there we go. So that's a great question. If you are losing members due to face-to-face, one way to approach it for your individual context could be reach out to your members that you are losing. If you've had members that have said, hey, maybe they're not going to renew, maybe they're not going to pay their dues. They're like, hey, we gotta pause this, right? Reach out to them and say, hey, what is something that would be valuable to you and your business during this time? We as your chamber want to be here to support you. That's really the value of integrating members into the strategy process, into that ideation, is because if you can include your members in creating these strategies and in creating what the chamber has to offer, they're naturally going to have more buy-in because they were invested into the process. So if you specifically have people that are leaving, I would recommend, again, depending on the size of your chamber and the resources available, reaching out to them. So that could be a phone call. That could be setting up, an online survey of just what are the key questions you want to ask. That could be reaching out to your whole membership. And again, you can use an online survey or offer times for open discussion. Once a week, we're going to have a time where our members can share their feedback, or ask those questions of your whole membership. How can we support you during this time? Because it's likely that you will have some members that have ideas of what they think would work well for your context. So don't feel like, as the leader, and as whether you're on the chamber board, on the chamber staff, don't think that you have to have all the answers. Build those relationships and connections and say, hey, do our members, do they have any ideas? It's likely they have a couple of ideas. You may even reach out to members and say, hey, would you like to, do you have an idea, and would your company like to sponsor it, right? You could do, like a virtual game night, or you could do a coffee chat, or you could do different ideas, and then have opportunities for businesses to sponsor those events. and things of that nature. So again, it's not for you to have all the answers necessarily, but including your members in these types of tools, like this change analysis tool, is a great way that you can get their feedback, and have them involved in the process. Okay, so we got a question here. You could survey your members and ask them what type of events they're interested in, and with the current circumstance, their preference. Coffee talks, lunch and learns, definitely. Those are all great ideas. I've even attended different collaborative events where businesses are able to pay for sponsorships so that they can have like a 15-second video or a 60-second video, like at the front end of an event, or at the tail end of an event. So think about, right now we are stuck digitally, right, because of the pandemic. Think about what are some of those innovative ways. And again, if you ask the members, they'll likely have ideas that you may not have thought of, or even if you had thought of it, if you have your members buy in and they're like, hey, our chamber's doing this awesome event, you got to come, right there, you have them sharing and promoting what the chamber is doing there. So this is just one tool, and keep in mind, it can get pretty complex. So you want to make sure you're only considering one change. So in the middle, you only want to consider one change at a time. Otherwise, it'll get a little out of control. But this is a tool that you as a leader could implement yourself, or you could work with someone like myself or a partner, an external consultant, things like that, to facilitate it for you. But I definitely want to give you all a tool that you could use in your chamber. Okay, and then let's see here. I got another question. We find that oftentimes our operation is always present oriented. What is the tactic to stay on the visioning course so that you can be effective in the present and near term while being prepared for envisioning the future? That is a great question, because that's a lot of individual tendencies. So this question makes me think of the philosophy of time. There's a time orientation philosophy by Peg Toms. And that philosophy is that individuals have a preference about their time orientation. So we have individuals who are naturally futures oriented, right? They naturally just like love thinking about the future. And I would likely identify myself in that space. We have the majority of people who are present oriented. They just like to think about the here and now and the checklist and what's going on. And then we have individuals that are past oriented, where they love thinking about, all the successes we've had in the past. They're likely, historians and know all kinds of facts about chamber events and happenings from 20 years ago. So all three of those are important. We have our future orientation, our present orientation, and our past orientation. And organizations, including chambers, need all three. But right, that's where we have to step in as leaders and say, again, depending on the size and scope of your chamber, it could be a conversation you have quarterly, but it definitely needs to be a conversation you have before you're putting any plans together, right? So it just becomes a way to have your members or your board members or whoever involved in that is just like, you know what, we are working on whether you're doing your annual operating plan, whether you're coming up with a new plan. It's like this is the first step. It's that simple. Our first step in this process together is that we're going to spend time visioning and thinking about the future. And then the second step is working on a strategy. So that's really where having our leaders, having you all really say, this is what we need to do first, is first really think about what's the vision for our chamber before we go to tactics. And so if you're in those conversations, right? So sometimes you may be in a conversation where you're like, we're focusing on the vision, but yet you still have different individuals in the group that want to say, well, what about blah, blah, blah currently? Or we can't do that right now, or that's not possible, this, that, or the other. If you're in person or also virtual, what I encourage and what I do in groups I'm facilitating, when I'm facilitating visioning work, and I just have maybe one or two individuals in the room that they just can't get past the present, like they can't do it. Having, again, if you're in person, having like a poster board, or if you're in virtual, having an area that you that's part of your screen share, where you just sort of sidebar, right? So it's, thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we're going to write it down on our sidebar and we'll address it at a different time. So it's just sort of managing the personalities, which can sometimes be difficult, but just having them feel heard. A lot of times if an individual just feels heard, that their concern has been noted, they'll like simmer down and you'll be able to move on if you're facilitating the work. So if you're working with people that just keep bringing up, well, what about this, or we can't do that, or this, thank them for that contribution. Thank you for that, and we will put it here where we're sort of sidebarring those conversations for a different meeting, and just focus back on what is the point of our session today. The point of our session today is to focus on XYZ visioning. So I hope that would help. Okay. So we have another question here, and I'm seeing that it's 12:12. So we have the question here. We're trying to determine how we relaunch our membership campaign in a way that is different and creative, and most importantly, gets results. Awesome. That is great. Creative and gets results. That's what we want. Okay. So how might we do this, right? So I'm going to offer another tool, the Futures Wheel tool. And again, like the tool we just talked about, the change versus benefit tool, this again is something that is scalable. So that means if you are on the call and you represent a very small chamber, or you are on the call and you represent a very large chamber, this tool is useful in any circumstance. Again, just the way it's facilitated, the amount of futures wheels that you create may be more if you have more people involved, but it's a tool that we can all use. So the futures wheel is a tool for thinking about possible implications. And you'll see I have it bolded, both positive and negative. Okay, so we don't just want to think about a utopia of what are all the great positive things that will happen if we do this change or this decision or this event or whatnot, but also think about, what are some of the negative things that can happen. Okay. And so again, this is tool just like the previous tool, that it's best when it's interactive, meaning we don't want it to just be one person at the chamber creating the future wheel and then saying that, okay, here's what we're doing. We want it to be iterative. We want it to include diverse perspectives. So we want it to include individuals with different lived experiences, different connections with the chamber, all kinds of different perspectives we want to have included in this. And then again, from doing this work, from filling out this futures wheel, we'll be able to look at different implications, and maybe some of them we want to target. We want like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's build a strategy that helps us achieve this idea. Or we may complete the futures wheel and think that's a risk we want to avoid. Like, nope, we don't want that to happen. So we're gonna work to make sure that we have caution around that we are not working towards that happening. Okay, so again, it's an ideation tool. So look at the chart here in the blue box. So in light of the previous question submitted, we're gonna talk about that. So they're changing, and I didn't include all the question because it was really long. So the context is they're launching a paid membership program. So before that, it was not paid. And so when they're doing this, the change will be in the middle. You see, I put in there members to pay. So in the middle, that's where you put whatever the change is happening. So this chamber is moving from a non-paid to a paid, and they want to create a launch plan that's creative, right? So what we're doing is we're going to fill out this implications wheel, this futures wheel, and then those insights are going to help fuel the plan and the campaign that they do with their context. Okay. So again, if I've pre-filled in some of this stuff just for the point of today's session and the fact that we're not in a very super interactive space where we can like capture in ideas. So here we go. So if you'll see in ring 1, that first inner ring, I just put in a few ideas. Again, not saying that these are right or these are correct, but just offering a visual for us to process through. So if the change is now members pay. So what might happen? So if you have members paying, then one implication is, the chamber has a source of funding. So we have one implication, funding for the chamber. If members are to pay, you then could offer promo codes, virtual promo codes. Hey, if you join in the next 2 weeks, we'll give you a promo code that allows a 20% off discount on your membership dues. Something along those lines. Also, if you have members to pay, you may get more committed members because they now have buy-in. They've invested financially. So there may be greater commitment to what's going on. So then, to the process of this, you just continue to fill out all the different circles, and you're not limited to this many circles. You could make multiple futures wheels. If you're doing this with a group, again, if you have a group of 3 or 4, you may just fill out one futures wheel. If you have a group of like 10 or 12, you may want to break out into smaller groups, and each group do a futures wheel, and then you come back together and share them. And capture all the ideas there. So then level 2, the next ring, right? That would be, okay, well, if level 1 implications happened, then what might happen? So here, let's explore a few more ideas. So if your chamber now has more funding, you may be able to pay for experts to come in and lead different trainings for your chamber. If you're using virtual promo codes and things like that, you may also be able to offer opportunities like bonus tickets. Pay for one ticket full price and you'll get a bonus ticket for the colleague of your choice. You may be able to do different social media contests, different types of virtual networking. And then also, if you have, committed members, your chamber may get more visibility if your members are, continuing to say, hey, I'm part of this awesome chamber. They're doing some really cool, different kind of things. So then, again, you can continue filling out different implications and don't feel limited to the circles. These are just how many circles that it is on this visual. And then level 3, what might happen if level 2 implications happen? Well, in this age of digital and social media, you may even expand the geographic reach if your chamber is local or a certain region. You may be able to even promote member stories, right? If you have all these different virtual types of connections, videos, social media posts about the chamber, things like that. You could even do chamber games, right? Like do some creative, I've seen some cool trivia night type of activities, interactive activities. Maybe the chamber hosts that, right? And if you have some trivia fans, they might bring their colleagues from, a different state or something like that for a fun environment. And then because we need to make sure we're not just doing positive implications, or also maybe negative implications, is that if you don't have a lot of chamber visibility or things like that, there may be the perception that your chamber is inactive, right? And that's not necessarily what we want. So you just want to make sure that in your wheels, you're sort of equating for both positive things as well as some negative things. So once you have all the different ideas filled out in your session, then you sit with your team and you're like, okay, let's identify what are the opportunities we want to go after. Like, hey, let's put together some strategies that, X, Y, Z. And then you want to also identify the things you want to avoid, the cautions. So it's as simple as, highlighting in green the things you want to do and red the cautions you want to avoid, right? So maybe you finish this wheel and you're like, okay, well, we want to invest in having experts come lead trainings, and that will expand our geographic reach, and then also do some fun chamber games. Like maybe those are things, hey, we want to do these things. Great. So then you will work with your team to develop that plan and that strategy, right, for how to go about that. And then maybe too, you want to, well, we want to make sure that we don't have a perception of being inactive or not existing as a chamber. And so that would be something you would use as you, work with your team. So the idea is that as you create these futures wheels, that you'll get different ideas and be able to inform your decisions. So we have a great question here. What are the different level 1, 2, and 3? Great question. So we are starting in the middle of the circle here. So in the middle of the circle, that's where you want to put whatever the change is or the decision is that you're trying to explore. So that's where you sort of put the point of the discussion. And then from there, you work your way out. So if this change happens, then level 1 is where those first implications, those first impacts will happen. So if we do this, then this may happen. So then level 2 would be if we do the level 1, right? So in this instance, if we have the level 1 example of the chamber now has funding. So if the chamber now has funding, then the chamber may be able to have to be able to pay experts to lead trainings, right? So it's sort of like this leads to that, possibly, right? It's just ideas. So it's not saying it directly will, but just saying, oh, well, this could lead to this. It's a brainstorming, right? So if you have members that pay, right, then they may be more committed. And if you have members that are more committed, they may give more visibility to the chamber, meaning they may talk about it on their LinkedIn, they may talk about it to their colleagues, like, hey, you got to join this chamber. It's doing something different and I really like it. So it's sort of what is the implication of? So it's not facts and it's ideas. So it's sort of like, if this happens, then this might happen. If level 2 happens, then level 3 might happen. So you're working out like a spider web. Okay. So do we have any other questions on the futures wheel or the change versus benefit analysis? So these are two tools, right, that are available for your chambers. So the ideas that come from either of these tools are what will help inform and help you develop strategy, right? So I had a lot of questions submitted about how do we get member buy-in and member participation. Using these brainstorming tools is a fantastic way to do it, because then if someone is offering their idea, right, and we allow them to give voice, we write down their idea, we thank them for their idea, even if in our head we may be thinking that's, maybe that's not an idea you have, but we write it down and we thank them for the idea, because we never know in group settings what may lead to something else, right? So we want to keep these different connections possible That's also why these are tools that you can do multiple times, right? The answer is not, let's fill in every circle in the futures wheel and say we're done because we've completed the task. The futures wheel is a tool that allows for that collaboration, that relationship building, that member buy-in, that member participation in shaping the strategy. So it's a mechanism for including others. It's a mechanism for creating that collective space, right? When we talk about strategic thinking, it's collective, it's present yet future oriented, right? Like we're doing this now, but we're thinking about future implications. These are tools that can be expansive thinking as well. Like we can use these when we're thinking, multiple years out or next month, right? They can inform our decisions, and they're artful yet analytical, right? Because we're allowing that space for creativity. You may have some individuals that really like to think of what may be sort of outlandish ideas, but by capturing them, we're able to come up with something that we never would have thought of. One other tip, if you're facilitating conversations with your members, a lot of times as individuals, as people, we only will voice or offer an idea that we think will be socially accepted, right? We're not, if we have a filter and we're like, I don't think everyone would like that idea, I'm not going to say it out loud, kind of thing. If you have idea quotas, that really helps people to get out of that space, and you may get some really extreme ideas that actually could really work for your chamber. So an idea quota may be, we are going to do this futures wheel exercise and we want to complete 3 or 4 different futures wheels before the session is over, or by next week, or whatever the time frame is. But then by having 3 or 4 of these, I mean, I didn't count, but I think there might be 30 ideas on here, right? Like if you do 3 or 4 of them, now you've got in 90, 120, 150 ideas that were generated from your members, generated from your team, that then you can start using and ranking which ones you want to move forward and which ones that you don't want to move forward at this time. Okay, so today, in session 2, we spent time looking at strategic thinking. We spent time looking at inclusion and futures and innovation, to really think about, okay, how are we going to apply this in our context? And so I have this offer out again. A ton of you participated last week. If you have more specific questions, please scan this QR code or send me an email. I would love to use it in our next session. All right, so I think I'm going to turn it back over for today.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Skidmore. And before I even start, happy birthday. You didn't tell us that it was your birthday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you all of you who participated and asked a lot of questions regarding this during this program and even last program. So I encourage you all again to use the barcode that Dr. Skidmore shared, and or to send her an email for any questions that you may have. It's again so great to see your enthusiasm during the training with all your questions and inquiries. Please do not forget to register for the CLA Coffee Connection on October 6th. As I speak, I am sharing the registration link with you all. So please register for CLA Coffee Connection. Like I mentioned, it is an informal 30 minutes networking event where you get to meet your fellow chamber leaders, as well as, talk about what you have learned during this whole entire training pod at the end of, our third training, which is going to be on October 6th, which brings me to, again, remind you and, welcome you all to register for our last training for this session, which is going to be, the topic is going to be on tools and methods for strategy and planning on October 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Please visit chamberleadershipalliance.org to register for the session, as well as the CLA Coffee Connection. And again, thank you all for your time this afternoon, for some of us here in East Coast. And we will all see you next week, not on October 6th for our last training. And thank you all. Don't forget to, fill out the post-training survey for this program, which you will all receive in your email shortly. Thank you all for your time. Have a good rest of the day.